At DKSH, we are the value creators, the market navigators, the catalysts for growth.
We exist for one purpose: to enrich people's lives. From the streets of the busiest cities to the most remote villages, we provide access to high-quality products, services and insights, creating sustainable value for our partners and generating jobs.
We have been at home in Asia for over 150 years. We have developed our business as entrepreneurs over 4 generations with a set of clear values and a long-term commitment to all our stakeholders.
DKSH, delivering growth in Asia and beyond. At DKSH, we are the value creators, the market navigators, the catalysts for growth.
We exist for one purpose: to enrich people's lives. From the streets of the busiest cities to the most remote villages, we provide access to high-quality products, services and insights, creating sustainable value for our partners and generating jobs.
We have been at home in Asia for over 150 years. We have developed our business as entrepreneurs over 4 generations with a set of clear values and a long-term commitment to all our stakeholders.
DKSH, delivering growth in Asia and beyond. At DKSH, we are the value creators, the market navigators, the catalysts for growth.
We exist for one purpose: to enrich people's lives. From the streets of the busiest cities to the most remote villages, we provide access to high-quality products, services and
Hi, hello everyone. How are you? I hope that you're well and healthy and that you're watching this. I'm your moderator, Kathy from Mise magazine. Thank you for logging in and to spend some time with us and also our guests for today. The idea of the program, a visit outdoors while indoors, it doesn't really need much explanation, as I think we know the reason why we are all indoors, right? So to keep myself sane, and also to keep, the spirit alive for the industry, I am reaching out to some friends from the region, from the industry, to get a view of what's happening on the ground in the country where they are. Okay, our guests are not going to be carrying a camera to walk around the city and show you what's happening per se, but what we are doing is actually asking them for their insights as things are happening on the ground in the country that they're in. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to introduce my guest for today. First, we have Mr. Andrew Clayton, General Manager, TNS Brass Shanghai, who is also the Sales Director of TNS Brass Asia Pacific. TNS Brass and Bronze Works is a leading manufacturer of faucets, fittings, and specialty products and accessories for the food service, industrial, commercial plumbing, and laboratory markets. In the last 2 decades, TNS has significantly increased its overseas presence with representatives now selling products in Europe, Australia, the Middle East, Canada, Japan, Southeast Asia, and also South America. Hi, Andy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kathy.
Yeah, I can see you're calling us from the office.
I am.
Yeah. Okay, maybe you can introduce a little bit about yourself, your time in China.
Okay, well, I came to China first in Taiwan and China in late 1980s and early 1990s. I spent 4 years studying in Taiwan and China. Then I went back and got a law degree and practiced law for 7 years. I came back on a vacation in 2003 and decided China had really changed in the time I'd been away. And I either needed to embrace China and stay in China or continue to practice law. And I decided I liked China a lot more than I liked the law. So I dropped the law and stayed in China. And I've been here in 18 years since then. So for the last 15 years in commercial food service equipment, first with eNotice for a few years, then as the managing director of Scotsman in China. And then 5 years ago, I moved to TNS and I've been employed here for the last 5 years. So the entire time here in Shanghai.
Okay, that is a long time in China. I've only been 4 times and only to the city of Shanghai. So I've got to chase up.
There's lots of beautiful places to visit in China. So I encourage you to go other places than Shanghai, even though this is home to me. Okay.
Yep. So thank you. Before and after that, we would like to introduce our second guest for today, which is from DKSH. DKSH China provides customers integrated and tailor-made services along the entire value chain, offering any combination of sourcing, marketing, sales, distribution, and after-sales support services to help them grow their business in new and existing markets. Their presence in China can be traced back to 1902, starting with the acquisition of a small Swiss trading company in Shanghai. And since then, DKSH has continued their expansion in China with more than 5 offices. And joining us today is Mr. Charles Biddle, General Manager, Technology for Hospitality of DKSH Shanghai. Hi, Charles. Ni hao.
Ni hao. Good afternoon, Katty. Good afternoon, Andy.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. Charles, a little bit introduction?
Sure. So my first time in China was in 2008. I came here as part of a study program. I have studied Chinese language and culture from the time I was quite young, over 15 years at this point. And I have called Shanghai my home as well for the past 6 years or so. Prior to joining DKSH, I was in the education management industry with a focus on cross-cultural communication. And so I was very excited to join DKSH about 2 years ago and really help our foreign suppliers bridge the gap between their home markets and entry into China. I think that a huge part of my personal interest in this country and culture is certainly the food. And so it's a really fun space to work in these days.
Okay, I was just telling the gentleman before we started that I actually don't speak Mandarin. And I'm the one with the Chinese surname. So I have to buck up here. Okay, so before we get started, to all our viewers, if you have any questions for the guests, please type them into the comment box below, either on Facebook or YouTube, and we will try to address them at the end of the session. Okay, so let's get started. And we're going right to the beginning. Okay, I don't really want to talk about, the doom and gloom of COVID, but rather your experience of the market when it first hit. Okay, this would be probably sometime in December 2019 and January 2020, right? That we start hearing of cases of the virus going around. So when the news first hit and Wuhan was in lockdown, what was actually happening on the ground in China, especially for businesses? Andy, maybe you could, take that question.
Sure. Back in late January and early February, I should say late January 2020, we were in the midst of Chinese New Year. The Spring Festival had started. And so when all the lockdowns started to occur in Wuhan, everybody was at home or on vacation at that point. I was actually outside of China and in Japan with my family and came back the last day of January. But as a comment during Chinese New Year, everything's very, very quiet. Not many businesses are operating. But when I came back, I mean, it was just completely quiet. And so in a way that had never been that way before. So it was very surprising to see no one in the airport, no one on the streets. And that was something I'd never experienced in my entire time here.
But that is actually, like you say, because it's the festive season and people, are awake.
You still get some people in restaurants, some people on the street, and then it was just zero. And that was what was so shocking in those first few days back.
Okay. What about for you, Charles? How was it for you when
Sure.
when they first announced?
I actually had a business trip planned to Wuhan in December. And one of my sales team said, hey, I don't think we should go right now. I'm hearing about an illness and I think it's better to postpone. And I said, okay, I agree. That makes sense. And didn't give it much more thought until, as Andy said, everything really slows down this time of year before the Chinese New Year, which begins next week this year. And so I had left the country. I went back to the US and my return flight to China for the same time, end of January, early February, was canceled. And so I ended up coming back to the country in early March and did my quarantine and then emerged into a world at that time which had, measures in place to really control the virus. But I was also seeing pictures, as Andy said, of just completely empty streets, completely empty buses. They were running, but there was nobody who felt comfortable to take them. And that's really unheard of, especially in a place so populous as Shanghai.
Okay. But, when you came back, Charles, it was already, like you say, in March. Were there already strict SOPs or did they start rolling out SOPs immediately, what you can and cannot do?
Sure. There's certainly a gap I can't speak to as far as February, the month of February. But when we emerged from quarantine, China had implemented this QR code system. So basically you access it through Alipay or a mobile payment system or your WeChat account, like a messaging system. And it basically tracks where your phone travels to and any exposure that you may have had based on other people's cell phones. And your QR code is one of three colors: red, yellow, or green. And so mine was red throughout all of my quarantine. And then on my 14th day, it turned green. And I was then basically free to move about the city, taking my temperature and showing the green code.
Okay. But these restrictions, right, it's not just in areas where, there are cases. Literally the whole of China went through the same restrictions, or Andy?
Yes, basically. So that didn't occur until late February, early March. So during February, they were trying to figure out how to implement a system that would work. And so I actually, because I was in Shanghai the entire time, I didn't get the QR code on my phone until April, because if you didn't leave the city, you could sort of operate without it. But you couldn't go into a restaurant. The restaurants weren't open. If you wanted to go to the hospital, you needed to have the QR code. But of course, everybody wanted to stay away from hospitals. So, if you led a very limited existence, you didn't need to have that QR code to operate at that point in time.
Oh, okay. What about
contact? For me, I went to home, to the office, or to the factory, and then back home. So there was nothing in between.
Okay, but for both of you, offices were still running like usual. The amount of people, back to office, was it more work from home? I am still working from home, and it's been a year. So how is it for DKSH in China? I'm sure you've got a big team, Charles.
Sure. The team here in this office is about 40 people today. Today, we're all certainly back to office every day. At that time, it was a mix of working from home and then coming to the office when possible. China was very fast to implement ventilation measures. So in the dead of winter, windows had to be open, no heating systems could be on. And so being in the office wasn't very comfortable at that time. By the time I actually got back, we were mostly back to the office with masks on, still no central heating. But throughout the spring, it warmed up and as case numbers decreased and tracking got more sophisticated, we've really been back to the office every day, I'd say, since late March.
Okay. And for you, Andy, it is a factory where you're running. So how does that work for your workers and your colleagues?
Well, the first week after I got back, the whole country was shut down, so they tried to figure out what to do. And then you still needed to be 2 weeks back in the country. So since I had just flown in, I couldn't actually come to the factory or come inside the gate. So I'd stand outside the gate and talk to the head of my factory for an hour, and then we discuss things. But really, there was almost nobody back from other provinces. So when I finally came back, there were 5 people at work in the factory. As time went by, more people would trickle in, and we then decided, we'd try to bring everybody back, but people were still fearful at that point. And this is mid-February by this time. And so we then had everybody who could work from home pull their computer out, and our IT team went around and installed it in everybody's home. And so that they could all work from home. And so that happened until early March. And then we all came back by that time, and we've been working consistently out of the factory since then. If somebody has a slight cold, we encourage them to stay home, of course, at this point in time. Or if they say, there's somebody I know who was kind of sick, it's say, okay, just stay home. You can work from home for the next 2 or 3 days. If you feel better, we'll see. But we also depend on that QR code. So, if somebody's in an area that gets sick, that would tell us, okay, don't come in.
Okay. Yep. So, that is what is happening for your business. But what about the hospitality, the F&B, the hotels? Are they going through the same kind of thing where, customers walk in, they need to have, the QR code read, temperature testing? What was it like for businesses, especially hotels, Charles?
Sure. So of the different customer segments that DKSH hospitality services, hotels were certainly hit the hardest. In no small part because they have no international customers. When the borders closed, they haven't seen foreign guests and tourists really since January of last year. And so they were heavily impacted business-wise. In terms of standard operating procedure, basically is pretty uniform across all different industry here. In terms of, to be seated at a restaurant, you need to have your temperature taken, show your QR code. They don't actually scan the QR code, by the way. They just check the color and to make sure that the date says it's today's date. And then you're able to be seated. Usually people are in masks. There's hand sanitizer readily available. And that was pretty standard throughout most of the spring, I would say, until June or July, when things really became quite a lot more relaxed, and even some of those measures were lessened.
Oh, okay. What about for restaurants? Dining in? Did they convert everybody to a delivery takeaway format? Charles?
I think that there was actually more change on the consumers' behavior in terms of, I'm wary of what's going on. I'm going to choose to do delivery today versus any sort of mandate in that regard. I'm sure we might talk about industry trends a little later on in this conversation, but delivery in China has always been very developed. It's very easy to push a couple buttons on your phone and get a broad range of cuisine, especially here in Shanghai. And so I think that experienced a huge boom, as people would prefer to eat in their enclosed office with their close colleagues versus sitting in a restaurant. But I know that I personally I felt comfortable going to restaurants, even in late March, early April. The restaurants would implement seating restrictions. So you might have to leave an empty table between seats at Wagas, which is a fast casual restaurant here in China. But other than that, there were no really big policy changes.
Okay. What about for you, Andy? Do you see any businesses, going with very strict, implementation of restrictions?
Well, I would echo what Charles said, is that I think you have to look at the time period, because restaurants really didn't reopen until mid to late March. And even then it was very restricted. You had to show the QR code, write down your telephone number, hand sanitizer. And there were few people who were willing to go out. One of the few places that was actually busy were bars that catered to foreigners. And so it's like, oh, I can go get a beer. I couldn't believe it. And that place was packed. But I would come and tell my colleagues at work, and they'd be like, you went to a bar? Oh my gosh. How many people were there? I said, oh, it was pretty crowded. And oh my gosh. So that was prevalent through late April, early May. And only really, I think that the sea change was when schools reopened. during May and early June. And then everybody said, if the kids can go back to school, it must be okay. And that was the big change in consumers' behavior. And then people started to fill up restaurants. And really, that has continued from June through like 2 weeks ago, probably, where a few more cases came out. People were a little bit more cautious again. But really, there was a good long period of time where people didn't feel many restrictions.
Okay. Okay, for us it's a little bit different. It's probably like what you say. It's a little bit of a yo-yo. You hear a couple of cases, and everybody gets paranoid again, and when it comes back down, everybody is like loosey-goosey again. Yeah. So, okay. So and looking at it, these businesses with this restriction, have you heard of anything like drop in business, less sales, anything like that for you, Andy?
Well, we're a manufacturing company, so we sell through distribution, and distribution was very nervous in Q1 and Q2. It came back in Q2 because everybody didn't have stock. Basically, they had just used up what they could. But Q3 and Q4 was very strong for us, almost exactly the same as Q4 2019. Okay. So really, that has come back in a big way, in part because Chinese, the issue that Charles was mentioning about tourism, it's also flopped the other way, is that Chinese tourists don't travel outside the country now. And so they're restricted. There's more staycations. There's more going to five-star resorts, only for 2 or 3 days, but they are very, very busy now. So Marriott, I was on a call back in probably late August, and they had 100% occupancy in Hainan Island across all their resorts for that month. So they were shocked too. And so I think that has been a big surprise to most people, that they didn't predict that the local 5-star and luxury hotels would actually perform well in the second half of the year.
Okay. The same for you, Charles?
Yes, I would echo that almost identically. For us, of course, Q1, Q2 was really tough. Yeah. And again, mostly because consumers' confidence was just very shaken. I think it had less to do with the specific policies that were maybe rolled out countrywide, and people were just scared to spend because we didn't know what to expect later. And then we had a very successful, especially Q4, but Q3 as well. And I have the exact same experience in terms of Hainan hotels. We have several customers down there, and I received similar statistics from them that they're at 95 to 100% occupancy since the summertime.
Wow. Okay. So that's good news. It
is good news.
It's good news. I think the rest of the world is feeling the opposite end of it at that time, especially when you're talking about May or April, May, June, July. I think most other parts of the world were still very much in the midst of the battle, right? Okay, so we're going to take a very short break here. And in our next segment, we will look at China now, or rather today. So to our viewers, stay tuned. We'll be right back after a couple of messages. Thank you.
Sentinel is a high-capacity UV-GI filtration device that can be placed just about anywhere there is a potential for virus spread to minimize the probability of infection.
Hi, so welcome back. Stretch your legs a bit. Okay, so now we're going to what we're seeing here now today, and what is different. Well, most countries around the world are going through waves, I don't know if it's the first, the second, the third, could even be the fourth or fifth. Okay, we see numbers going up, coming down, and relapses here and there. Okay, the good news, of course, is we know that the rollout of vaccine is happening, but I think everybody realistically know it's going to be some time still for the vaccine to really take effect. Okay, Malaysia is now in its third wave, and our numbers today are higher than a year ago or any time before that. Okay, so what is now happening on the ground in China? Is COVID already a done deal? You know, is it gone bye-bye forever? Andy?
I would say it's not gone forever. You know, I read about what's happening in Malaysia, and of course, being an American, seeing what's happening in America, and really, we haven't had any kind of experience similar to that, except for those first month. So there may be ripples in China, but there's no wave. So they'll have an isolated outbreak, let's say in Dalian or Qingdao, and then they'll shut that city down, and people from that city can't travel out, and then people really don't want to travel to that city. So that will then, within a period of 3 to 4 weeks, you won't hear any more about that because it really isn't a problem anymore. So, you know, it's challenging to travel domestically because, excuse me, as soon as, you know, you plan a trip somewhere, there's a case somewhere near there, and that trip's off. So you have to be flexible these days, in China. But there's really the second wave, I would say, has never really occurred. There's been a more outbreak of cases in the last 3 weeks, and that's caused a lot of concern. But those seem to be waning in terms of the numbers. And, you know, in China, we're talking about for the entirety of China, less than 500 cases a day, and then usually less than 100. So it's it doesn't seem like it's going to inhibit business from being done after we return from Chinese New Year.
Okay. What about for you, Charles?
I feel similarly. This concept of waves that I hear discussed in other markets, I feel very fortunate that I don't have a sense of what that's like here in China. I think that when Andy says we've experienced ripples, that's very accurate. Of course, when things first got started in January and February, that was very scary. And I echo his sentiment that, you know, a few cases pop up in Harbin. And so, okay, I won't go to Harbin for business next week as planned, but I can still go to Chengdu. And so that's how a lot of my travel for business has been impacted in the last 2 quarters, I would say. Mm-hmm. And most recently here in Shanghai, there were a few cases linked to specific hospitals, and the government was very quick to cordon off those locations. I drove through a section of a neighborhood called Xintiandi, and it was all cordoned off with tape and officials in hazmat suits. And the vibe is very much, oh, I don't want to go near there. So whether it's in your own city or in a specific city, that's the feeling is, okay, let's stay away for now.
Okay. But, you know, when as we go through all these waves, right, in Malaysia, the SOPs or standard operating procedures do change. How, does it change in China? Is the SOP being affected by how serious, how many cases? You know, does it relax? Does it, you know, get more strict in some instances? Charles?
Sure. So I think we see a return with the yo-yo sort of back to where we were in the springtime. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, in the last few weeks, I've had to present my QR code to come into this office park where our office is located. We weren't having to do that from probably June until November, December, I should say. Mm-hmm. And so that has restarted. There are cameras set up to show your temperature as you enter the office park. These sorts of things have been re-implemented.
Okay. What about for you, Andy?
The same issue. I would agree. I mean, I think it's at least most apparent for me with my children, because their schools are implementing stricter policies. So usually for Chinese New Year's, I'll go visit my wife's family, or I'll go to NAFM in America. But of course, that's not going to be held until August this year. But taking children outside of Shanghai is now prohibited, because then when they come back, they must go into quarantine. So we're staying home for the next 2 weeks, and you know that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing to be with my kids in our house, and then my in-laws are coming to visit us instead. So these are just kind of small problems. And when before you travel, you always, or at least I always, try to call the health bureau of the cities I'll be visiting to make sure I understand what the requirements are for that. And you also check with the hotel where you're visiting, because they're pretty cognizant of the changes recently. So when I was traveling only 3 weeks ago, I called up the hotel and they said, oh, well, yesterday it changed. So, I didn't know that, so I canceled that trip, or that portion of the trip. So you just have to be flexible, and something, we've learned to do.
Okay. But, with all these waves, do you see consumer trends changing as well? Do they, when it was at its peak, everybody is on takeaway, or there are still people dining out? Do you see waves of consumer habits changing?
I don't. That's the strange thing, is that really since June last year, things have been pretty smooth. So, I think that there was a slight decline maybe 2 weeks ago going out to dinner, because I go out quite often with my family on the weekends. And really, you don't see much change. There was the Haidilao, which is the hot pot, was absolutely packed. I mean, there were children playing in the playground, people waiting for tables, like about 20 people waiting there. Some of them getting their nails done. And so that, and every restaurant in that complex was full. So I think that's pretty standard, at least in Shanghai. I can't speak to every place in China, but at least in Shanghai.
What about for you, Charles? Do you see consumer habits changing, especially when it comes to dining?
I would have to agree. I don't see consumer habits changing. Again, I think people get cautious when there are cases, and that is published openly by the government. There's an official WeChat page that'll tell you the increase in cases in location day to day, and so people are very aware of that. But I think when you see cases spike, you see delivery demand spike, or perhaps staff here in this office will bring their own lunchbox from home if they don't feel comfortable eating in a restaurant. But these are very, very small changes, and I don't see anything on the macro level.
Okay, but were there restrictions like how many people per table? I mean, of course, distance between table, we know there is definitely, but in terms of number of people who can eat out together at the same time, were there restrictions for those?
To my knowledge, there were no restrictions like that. I think that the most similar restrictions would have occurred in the springtime, and that was limiting how close you can sit to the table next to you. Or in a restaurant for noodles that I ate in Chengdu in April, they had removed every other chair. So a group of 4 of us could only sit spread out, but we entered the restaurant together and the chairs were rearranged and nobody really stopped us. I see restrictions on the number of people that can congregate most frequently in elevators. And even then, I would argue that it's not always respected as it maybe is intended to be.
Okay, but I mean, part of Chinese culture is to eat with the family, everybody in one big table, and I think those restaurants who runs Chinese cuisine are actually quite badly hit because of this, ruling where you can't have a table more than 4 people or even 6, especially here in Malaysia, and I think Singapore is the same and many other countries. So for you, Andy, when you dine out, especially like you say Haidilao, it's normally a family of 4, 5, 6, or even more. So how is Haidilao doing that in China? How are they handling?
I've heard a restriction that was put in earlier this week that will last for the entirety of the Spring Festival, and that will say more than 7 people at the table will not be allowed. But this was something new. And then we were I go out with my team every other Wednesday night because we do a conference call with our counterparts in America. And we were like, oh, we've got 7 people. Are we going to be forced to have one person sit elsewhere? And they said, oh, it's okay. So I'm not even sure it's going to be enforced that strictly, but something like that has come down recently. But that's the first thing that I've heard of like that since April. Okay.
So, for the rest of the world, like we said earlier, it's still very much a period of uncertainty, right? But from what we hear of China, things seems to be progressing fast. Do you have the same opinion that the industry is now back on track it's back to normal. People are going out to eat. People are gathering. Is it the same for you, Andy?
Yes. Our projections for 2021 are to try to get back to the 2019 levels. And I think that's achievable. So, 2019 was the best year we've ever had, and we believe 2021 can get back there. So, hopefully, if the COVID, kind of remains at this level, then I don't see any big obstacles to that occurring.
Okay. What about for you, Charles?
I agree as well. I am very optimistic about 2021, barring any major resurgence in the virus. We also had a strong 2019, and I would expect 2021 to achieve that, if not better, if I may be so optimistic. We see, especially the coffee industry here is booming. And so that's a big, big part of our DKSH's hospitality business today is coffee machines, both automatic and semi-automatic. And we are very hopeful for good sales in 2021 of those units. And it was those units in Q3 and Q4 2020 that experienced some of the greatest pickup in sales.
Okay. So if you look at, from what we read of other countries as well, or even in Malaysia, the government, of course, stepped in to help, revive the economy or boost the economy. Was that necessary in China, Charles?
To my knowledge, there were subsidies given to certain industries. I am not aware that hospitality was one of those. I know that they came into effect in some regard for like human resources support for large companies or maybe even small companies. I am not aware of any government support specifically for the hospitality industry.
Oh, okay. What about, do you know of anything, Andy?
Not for hospitality. I think that hospitality is kind of left to its own device. But for most small and medium-sized enterprises, the government did a series of, you usually have to match what your employees pay into a fund or required to pay. And that was relaxed for small and medium-sized businesses. So that saved a lot of companies on the taxes and the benefits that they needed to pay out. And so that benefited a lot of hospitality, smaller restaurants.
Okay. Do you see the spending power of people shifting as well during this period? I mean, for some businesses were not operating. I don't know how much is it in China. It's very much here in Southeast Asia. Some businesses were forced to close or were not able to operate. So, spending power of a consumer is, of course, going to fluctuate. Do you see that in China? Have you heard of anything like that, Andy?
I don't think that's really happened. If you look at the luxury brands like Gucci and Mise, they have record-setting sales because all those people who would fly off to Europe and buy it at a discount now are trapped within China. And I think the same is true within the hospitality industry. I think at the first 6 months, people were unwilling to spend anything, but now luxury dining, it's a luxury that's affordable to them, and they're willing to spend on that. And if there's a problem, then you can get the delivery from a very expensive restaurant. So, now it's not just delivery from, low end or medium end dining. Right. Luxury will actually, you can have them deliver as well. So I think that this has survived remarkably well in China, and better than I think anybody predicted after COVID hit. So in April, May last year, everybody was wondering how profound the influence would be. And really, it has turned out to be much less than we expected back then.
Wow. Okay. What about for you, Charles? Do you see any shift in spending power of?
I would more or less agree. I think it's important to mention again that Andy and I are both based in Shanghai, which is one of the wealthier and more developed regions. Especially, a lot of these cities on the East Coast are quite well developed and comparatively wealthy compared to central or far west China. And so I would definitely agree that business is booming across many, many sectors here, especially on the East Coast. While I do travel frequently to places like Chengdu and Chongqing, and I can say the same is true for those large cities, it's harder for me to say about, some of the fourth or fifth tier cities that I have not visited. And that might not have such developed luxury, either food or commodity industries. but I do not see a big difference in individual spending power. Again, I think that because we can't spend outside of the country, either on travel or goods with different tax, then all of that consumption is still happening domestically.
Okay. So it's a good time.
If I could just add one quick
Andy.
thing, is that I go to visit suppliers pretty often, and I've been surprised how strong most of them have been. So if they're supplying to, let's say, Home Depot in America, they were running flat out for the last 6 months. So I was just shocked about how successful some of these businesses are at times when you expect so many of them to be hurting. That just was not the case.
Oh, okay. So it's the best time to set up business in China.
If you can get in.
Yes, if I can get in, that's true. Okay, so we will take another break, and then we're going to come back with our last segment where we're going to talk about the future, right? Okay, so let's take a break, gentlemen. We'll be right back.
See you soon.
Okay.
At DKSH, we are the value creators, the market navigators, the catalysts for growth.
We exist for one purpose: to enrich people's lives. From the streets of the busiest cities to the most remote villages, we provide access to high-quality products, services and insights, creating sustainable value for our partners and generating jobs.
We have been at home in Asia for over 150 years. We have developed our business as entrepreneurs over 4 generations with a set of clear values and a long-term commitment to all our stakeholders.
DKSH, delivering growth in Asia and beyond.
Okay, thanks. If you're still tuning in, thank you for staying with us. And now we've come to the last segment where we want to talk about the future. Okay, going forward, after the year we've had in 2020, you just really want to, erase it off. So going forward, with especially in China now, I mean, we have all shared, like in our last segment, the impact is not really, so big, unlike what we're seeing in other parts of the world. Right. But do you think that COVID has changed the industry somehow? The hospitality industry, the F&B industry, Charles?
It's a big statement, but I am inclined really to say that the change has not been big. I know how that probably sounds to a lot of listeners, especially outside of China, and I have huge empathy for these people because my parents are an excellent example of Americans who've been extraordinarily impacted, not only economically but like business wise, but in their personal day-to-day lives. Mm-hmm. But again, I feel very fortunate to be here in China where we haven't had such a big impact. I think that in terms of the industry where I do see changes, and it's hard to say even if this is because of COVID or already a planned business expansion, but you'll see companies like McDonald's have rolled out a new, less face-to-face contact type of concept. It's called M2Go, and basically the McDonald's workers will prepare the food or the coffee and put that into a customized locker, an individual locker. There's a whole wall of them for customers to come and input their code to, which they got via the app. And then they open the locker and grab their food. So it's totally face-to-face contactless. And that's a concept that I see could be very successful because, again, there are times where people are more hesitant about interacting with huge crowds. It's less about the overall policy changes, but I think, SARS is also still in recent memory for many people living on this side of the world, especially in China.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's always been a really big hesitancy, and that's the big driver for a lot of the change that we do see. Hesitancy or concern for what could be.
Yeah. Okay. For you, Andy?
I would agree with Charles. I've seen less change than I expected. So there is, I think, an increase in terms of people are more willing to have delivery and, better quality delivery in terms of higher standards or, white tablecloth type restaurants or more expensive restaurants. But other than that, I've been surprised how little there's been. So as an example, I'll cite, TNS makes sensor faucets, which in America, the use of sensor faucets quadrupled in the last year because people wanted to improve hygiene. They wanted to have, be able to wash their hands multiple times. The standard operating procedures in a kitchen were really being enforced very strictly. In China, our sensor sales were basically flat to last year in terms of everything else we sold. Our total sales were down and sensor sales were down the exact same amount. So that was something we expected to really jump up. But really, that didn't happen. And I think that that's the biggest surprise about all of what's happened in China is that it hasn't changed everybody's habits about hand washing so much or about the habits in the kitchen. And, I think that that's different from what I hear about in America and in other markets around the world. And China's very unique in that, I think.
Yeah. I'm sanitizing till my hands are dry. Out of the constant reminders that you have, wash your hands, wash your hands, and wash your hands. So to hear that it's not, causing any change in China, it's pretty unique, I would say.
I believe it is. I mean, I expected it to change, and it hasn't. And, but my own habits haven't changed that much. Okay, I wash my hands a little bit more, but not extensively more. So, But if I talk with anybody in the States, they've always got the bottle of Purell with them, or that you got to go wash your hands after this. And so when we did video calls, 9 months ago, they laughed at us for wearing our masks in the meeting. And now, they're wearing their masks and we're wearing our masks because we're all sitting, doing these video calls together in rooms. But other than that, it hasn't really changed that much.
So, but like what you said, Charles, businesses like McDonald's have adopted a different concept where you literally pick from a locker your food. Right? Any other that you've seen happening in China? I mean, I'm very curious, like for Chinese restaurant where the sit down of a big table, how are these people, are there any changes there? Because in Malaysia, we would have to think of how these Chinese restaurants are going to cope because they literally can't open for business because they can't sit a round table of 10 people unless it's a very big table and everybody is still 1 meter away, Right. Yeah. So do you see any of these Chinese brands making changes like this?
There was a time when I think we were being encouraged to really use public chopsticks versus our own chopsticks. This is for people who might not be familiar. Sometimes there's public chopsticks, which you use to serve yourself from the main dish and put the food on your plate. And then you use your own, private chopsticks to feed yourself. And that's a way to minimize the spread of saliva or whatever on the serving plates. And I think that maybe there was, a couple times where I was encouraged at a big business dinner or something, or dinner with friends in a restaurant to, everyone use your public chopsticks, please. Don't use your own chopsticks. But I mean, even that I don't think has stuck around in terms of behavior change. In terms of industries that have changed, I understand that abroad, there's been a large increase in retail, pre-prepared foods for consumption. I think that maybe home delivery for groceries has surged, at least in the foreign expat, so to speak, community here in China. I know that a lot of my foreign friends are in the habit of ordering groceries to their homes in larger quantities, much more than we ever used to. So that's perhaps a change, but it's also not pre-prepared foods. I think that where other countries have seen a boom like that, because delivery was already so ubiquitous here in China, there has not been a big demand for pre-prepared, let's say, sandwiches or wraps or whatever it is that you might pick up from a grocery store. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. What about for you, Andy? Do you see any big change in concepts or brands implementing a new form of service?
Strangely, as Charles was talking, I only thought of one change, and that wasn't driven by COVID, but rather by a governmental discussion about food waste, and that the central government has declared that there is too much food waste in China, that the amount of dishes being served at large public gatherings, such as a big business dinner, instead of the company, covering the entire Lazy Susan with 25 dishes, they're now being encouraged to only order, 12. And it's still, there's too much waste. I mean, there's too much when you go to a big banquet, there's too much on that table for any amount of people at that table to eat. But the amount has gone down significantly. So this has happened, but this had nothing to do with COVID, strangely. It just happened because there was a blogger who died because of overeating, supposedly, and then that sort of, I think it's an honest discussion about waste and whether that's a good thing for China as a whole, and that's changed more behavior than COVID.
Okay, yeah. Going back to food waste, I mean that is an issue for a lot of countries as well. But the other thing that have generated out of COVID is plastic waste. I don't know how much is it, or is it apparent is that a problem in China? Do you have a lot of disposables that are being used or discarded? Because more people are doing delivery and takeaway. So is that a problem? Do you see that now an issue that the government would pick up, Charles?
Certainly, I think it's a problem. You think about the number of people in this country, and I myself am a contributor to the problem. I order delivery all the time. It's so convenient. It's so affordable. And there's so much plastic. My trash can is left full of plastic, and I feel typically I'm a pretty plastic conscious guy. I'm so American with my Nalgene bottle that I take everywhere. And, I think it's a big problem that the government certainly has a plan, long-term plan to curb. What that is specifically, I'm not in a position to say myself, but I do see a trend in terms of changing the types of packaging that you might have your food in for takeout. There's been a move towards paper. Recently, the Family Mart, which is a convenience store in my neighborhood, has changed to not only charging you for bags, which was a change about a year ago, and now the bags are not the typical plastic, but they're more of like a canvasy type, which you're more likely to reuse.
Okay. What about for you, Andy? Do you see waste, or rather general delivery waste, being an issue with takeaway?
I think it is. I mean, but as people have migrated to more delivery, this has been an increasing problem, and I think the government's paying attention to it. I haven't seen many ghost kitchens in China. I think most people are delivering from the stores that they have in large urban areas such as Shanghai. I would actually expect there to be more ghost kitchens because of the cost of renting that storefront. But those haven't been as popular as I expected. I heard of this first 3-4 years ago, but that really hasn't expanded at the rate that I would have believed it would have. So, these kinds of some trends are moving quickly and some trends aren't. Okay.
So, going back to in terms of concept and also menu change, do you see anything that might be a trend going forward, a new trend, a possible new trend that will come out of this?
Yeah, strangely, I think hot pot is getting even bigger business in China, and I think that has to do with the fact that everything's cooked to such a high temperature. So you go everywhere in China, and there's in a shopping mall, they'll have 8 hot pot restaurants. I don't know how they all stay in business, but they all seem to be pretty busy. So I think that kind of, cooking in front of you, whether that be hot pot, kind of Korean barbecue, Japanese barbecue, that seems to have gotten increasing adoption during COVID-19. But that's just, from going around the country, I just see that more and more often than I see anything else.
Okay. What about for you, Charles? Do you see any emerging concepts that, will soon take over the world?
I actually, speaking of ghost kitchens or central kitchens, I agree that it's not a concept that's expanded here as fast as it has in, say, Europe or the United States. But I do actually think that that's an emerging trend. And we here at DKSH Hospitality have on hand a few projects that are moving in that direction. I think it's less to do with the pandemic and more to do with rising labor costs and rental costs.
Okay.
And it's just a very cost-effective way to still produce a very large output of takeaway or delivery food. But I do think that we'll see that in the next few years. I would like to see, and I think this is coming, but again, takes time, is more connectivity between equipment. Right now, we have some key suppliers who are all working on cloud solutions to be able to connect your oven to your blast chiller, to your sous vide machine, whatever you've got going on. And this also has huge implications for hygiene control. And so while we may not have seen big changes in 2020 with the pandemic, I do think that we're moving in that direction.
Okay.
Especially as China's population grows older, there'll be a lot more elderly care or need for elderly care. And so I think that's a big industry we'll see, especially an increased need for hygiene, very strict hygiene regulations. But that's 5-10 years from now, I think.
Yeah. Okay. But for Charles, as a project company, I mean, DKSH does projects for hotels and restaurants. Were there, during this period of time, when you were doing your projects, were there any change in requests in terms of, we got to take away the buffet, we don't want to have the buffet counter anymore, or there were more demands of implementation, whether for hygiene or for whatever purpose? Were there any changes in terms of design of a kitchen, of a F&B outlet, anything like that?
Not in my experience. We experienced a lot of delays. A lot of projects that were originally supposed to happen in 2020, Q1, Q2, even Q3, Q4 have been pushed back to first quarter this year. So we had a bunch of projects on hold. But in terms of actual change for their request or design request, as we do design as well, not really.
Okay. So. And Andy, sorry, you were saying that sensor faucets were not selling like hotcakes during that period of time. Yeah?
They've done well, but they're not increasing at the, taking market share away from more traditional faucets is what the trend we're seeing around the world.
Okay.
We're not seeing big changes either. Maybe small changes. People want more glass fillers, which is a hand-free way to fill your glass, whether it be through a sensor or you push it yourself. But those are pretty small around the edges. We want to push sustainable concepts and ideas like that, and that's been a harder adoption than we had thought. We want to emphasize waste isn't just in the kitchen waste or food waste, it's water waste. And that's very important to a place like China and all throughout Southeast Asia where we don't have as much fresh water as is needed. And so, we try to emphasize that, but we don't find that people are still more conscious of, that first initial cost.
Okay. But going back to one statement you made earlier in terms of better demand for better hygiene standards, were there anything that was particularly implemented during this time in terms of hygiene standards?
No, not really. I mean, that's the strange thing is that you wanted it to happen because that would favor us compared to our competitors, our local competitors. So we were very hopeful that would occur, but it just didn't happen. And we were a little disappointed, to be honest, because that would have been good for our business. But it's just been. It's not that we've suffered, but it's just it didn't change as we had hoped.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I need to ask, what surprised you most throughout the last 12 months? We'll take the 1 year benchmark. What surprised you most during this period with the COVID, the pandemic, and the economy that is happening? What surprised you most about China, Charles?
It's a big question. I mean, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I think that I'm surprised at how much hasn't changed. As Andy just said, I was selfishly hopeful that there would be more hygiene regulations, as I believe that that could be good for some of our products are very well set up to control hygiene or have very clear hygienic selling points. I think until cost is really made a factor, such as, you know, if water were really expensive or if electricity were really expensive in country, I think that would make a big difference. Today, it's not particularly expensive, either of those things. And so I'm a bit off topic, but basically I'm surprised at how much has not changed.
For you, Andy?
Exactly the same. I expected there would be some kind of, you know, monumental shift here, or at least a small shift, where really we've gone back to the exact same business model as we had before. And our distribution is pretty much the same. You know, the projects are very much the same. Our chain store growth is, you know, pretty much the same. So I expected there would be something, but we break it down by, you know, each category we sell into, whether it be chains, high-end hotels, or general market. And really those percentages all dipped exactly the same in 2020 compared to 2019. And it was just shocking that there was so little differential between, other than it was less than what had happened, you know, a year ago.
Yeah, so China just literally did a pause button rather than a reset.
I think that's an accurate way to put
it. Okay, so Andy, your expectation going forward for 2021, personally and also for the industry, where do you see it moving towards?
Well, I think that we'll be back. I'm hopeful to 2019. I think a lot of the projects that Charles was talking about have been pushed out of the last couple of years. Things like theme parks are now really quite busy in China. Disney has basically recovered. There's a lot of new theme parks opening, which is a business we do a little bit with. But that's because the Chinese, you know, overseas customers who were traveling overseas are now staying within the country. So I think it'll be pretty good. The question is whether all those travelers who were traveling internationally to Malaysia, to Thailand, to all the countries, what will happen when they get the vaccinated and they, you know, and those countries are open back up? Will they return to that sort of international travel because they were doing it in the past? And that's the one thing that's different right now. I mean, I really, you know, I'm supposed to oversee Southeast Asia and I can't go visit it. So that's kind of distressing to me. But Cindy, who works for me in Malaysia, I mean, she's just has, just like you, she has to work from home and can't travel to any of the other places in the territory, countries. And I think that that's really, I'm excited for this opportunity or to listen in future weeks so that I can find out what's happening in, you know, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, because really I want to hear what's happening there because I have no idea what's really happening other than the snippets of information I you know, have to gather. So I think China will be strong economically, you know, as it has been for the last, you know, 20 years, and it has recovered pretty quickly and hopefully will continue to do so.
Okay. What about for you, Charles? Your expectation for 2021?
I also have high hopes that we might be able to travel. You know, it sounds like Andy and I have both traveled fairly extensively domestically this year, despite restrictions, but it would be really nice to be able to, you know, have China open back up again. And I know there's a lot of people who are stuck outside waiting to re-enter. That's not possible due to current regulations, even with letters from companies. Right now, because of the Chinese New Year period, where things are a little bit more restricted due to all the domestic travel that's about to happen. So I would hope that, you know, maybe in Q3, we're able to even further relax restrictions, maybe at least between China and designated other places like, you know, the Hong Kong Autonomous Region or you know, right now, even for Taiwan, you need to quarantine both ways. And so it would be really nice if we were able to have some travel bubbles between Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, at least, if not, if you know, if we can't get back to being truly open.
I think probably the first country would be New Zealand. New Zealand seems pretty steady.
True.
Yeah. Well, you know, we're all hoping for the best and, you know, that we all can gather again. There's one last question. I understand that trade shows in China are running. They are back to normal. Is that the same for you, Andy?
Yes, I think both Charles and I were at a trade show in Guangzhou at the end of December, and it was quite busy. Everybody was masked up, but there were very few foreigners there. So, you know, foreigners who either from Europe or from the rest of Asia who were coming to look for new suppliers. They just weren't there. And a lot of Chinese companies make a lot of money supplying those markets. And so I think those export opportunities have been restricted, whereas the domestic business was quite robust. But the number of companies like TNS or our foreign peers, they weren't displaying. And so hopefully when we have Hotelix at the end of March, things will be back to normal. I expect that will be a much more international show in terms of the number of companies participating, or Western companies participating. But still, it's doubtful that there will be many foreigners being allowed into China at that point in time.
Okay. Well, so gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure to have you, and I hope you have a good time with us as well. Thank you for being our tour guide for this short trip to China. Yeah, and I look forward to meeting both of you in person to have a good hot pot.
Please do. And so I hope you're able to come in March.
Well, I'm supposed to be in China for Hotelix, but I doubt, I will be able to get there anytime within the next 6 months or so. Yeah, so we hope that, both your companies and also that the industry is back on its feet in China, and hopefully here in Southeast Asia, we're going to experience the same wave of going back to whatever that was normal. Okay, so thank you very much. So to all our viewers, till the next time, please do subscribe and also follow our pages so that you can join me as I go off to the next country and see what's happening on the ground. So to everyone, take care and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.